What's up, guys? Welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Ordell, and in today's video we're going to be covering a fascinating but very playable option for you e4 players, and you're going to get it all the time against e5, in which case you can play this move of bishop c4, right? We're not playing the main line of knight f3, putting some pressure on e5, nor are we going with the Vienna game of knight c3, but instead we're simply moving out our bishop on move 2. Now, I must admit, I used to think that this move was a little bit silly. Now, of course, I didn't think it was a blunder or anything, but I always thought, okay, I mean, we're eventually going to play knight c3 or knight f3, so why don't we just play that first, right? Usually in chess, we bring one of our knights out, or maybe even both, before one of our bishops. But guys, simply by playing bishop c4 first, before you bring out one of your two knights, there are a ton of extremely interesting possibilities that can take place. First off, your opponent is out of their comfort zone, right? e5 players simply are not prepared for bishop c4, right? I don't know if you guys have heard of the great Carlini on the Coffee Chess YouTube channel, but when I do play e5, he's the only person I've played over the board, at least, that I can remember who goes with this bishop c4, bishop's opening move, right? Almost everyone plays, you know, the King's Gambit, Danish Gambit, knight f3, knight c3. Bishop c4 is rarely seen, and because of that, you can get black to mess up their move order and get them into openings that they're not even used to playing. On top of that, simply by playing bishop c4, there's new lines and variations that can take place, which by playing one of the knights out first, simply can't. Let's first start out with this move of bishop c5. Now, this happens quite a bit, right? I mean, black going, okay, you're putting some pressure on my weakest pawn in the position. I'm going to do the same thing to you, right? By the way, the f-pawns are the weakest pawns in the opening simply because only the kings defend them and nothing else. Well, against this move bishop c5, though, we can play d4, right? Breaking through in the center of the board, attacking the bishop. And note here that playing e takes d4 is actually a mistake because we have this shocking move of bishop captures on f7 with check, followed by queen h5. We're down a piece, but we're about to get it right back, right? We see a move like g6, thank you for the bishop, knight c6. It's good here to throw in a little move like queen c4. That way black doesn't start gaining tempo against us if we do it later on. Just throw a check in really quickly. And here if black goes with the best move, king g7, we're just going to develop. And I think that here white does have a very playable and nice edge. By the way, when we do play queen c4, a move like king e8 isn't very good because we're going to play knight f3. And soon we're just going to capture on d4. And notice here, I mean, the king is on its starting square, but it's very vulnerable to attack. It's not castled, and it's not very well defended. I think a king on g7 is much more protected, at least by the h7 and g6 pawns, and that's why king g7 is the computer recommendation. Now, going back to the move d4, again, if you see e takes d4, capture on f7 with check, with queen h5 check, possibilities looking to capture back that bishop and win the pawn on d4 as well. What happens if bishop takes on d4? Well, in this case, we're going to play knight f3, right? Attacking both this minor piece and the pawn on e5. So if the bishop wants to run away to a square like c5 or b6, we're just going to capture off this pawn, right? And in the process, have a double attack on f7. This is not what black wants. So here black goes with the best move, knight c6. We're now just going to snatch off this bishop. What does black do in this situation? Well, no, if black takes with the pawn, we actually have a couple of different possibilities. Okay, first off, I think we should just castle, right? Castle our king, get it to safety, and then start trying to play attacking chess. The best move here for black is surprisingly knight ge7. And against this, we have a couple of different approaches. Okay, one of them is playing a move like c3, right? Offering up a pawn. Look, if black doesn't take on c3, then we're going to take towards the center, and we're going to have two nice centralized pawns, and that's great for white. And if white does lose this pawn on c3, then, okay, we're down a pawn, but we play knight takes c3. We got a big edge in development, and we're playing some fun attacking chess. But it's good to note that against this move knight e7, if you want to even out the material, you can totally do that. Simply play knight d2, knight f3, and look to win this pawn back on d4. Black's simply not going to be able to hold on to it. They can try to play something like bishop g4, which at first sight seems to stop us from obviously taking this pawn because we don't want to lose our queen. But in this instance, we're simply able to capture on f7 with check, right? Play knight g5, capture off the bishop, even material. And I mean, come on, their king's not castled. Our king is. e6 is in particular a huge, huge weakness. Even if a move like queen d7, we're just going to throw our knight into there. And black has some serious issues that they got to work through. So y'all, if you do see a move like knight ge7, you can play c3 and really try to play aggressive attacking chess, getting ahead even more in development, or you can simply go 1, 2, and 3. What about this move of d6? Well, as always, we do have c3 as a possibility, right? Simply offering up a pawn, capture back with a knight. This is the kind of position that you're going to get out of the bishop's opening, especially against bishop c5 if they don't fall for any traps, right? It's not like we're completely crushing this position. It's move 8. We haven't won the game yet, and we're really not going to be trying to checkmate the king anytime soon. But let's just count in terms of development, right? Right now it is black's move, so they can develop one of their pieces, but let's just say they do, right? Let's say they play a move like knight e7 or bishop e6 or knight f6. They're going to have 2 pieces developed, right? We currently have 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then it's going to be our move. We have options like queen b3 in the future, putting pressure on f7 and b7 as well. This is just a very fun and playable middle game for white. Right. Going back, though, I did want to mention, if you do see this move d6, which is played all the time in online chess, we can also win this pawn back pretty quickly, not just by doing the knight d2, knight f3, but also by this extra possibility of bishop b5, right? Since this pawn has moved to d6, this knight is now pinned to the king, and we're going to look to capture back on d4 with our queen, evening the material and giving ourselves a nice space advantage in the center. What happens if black plays this move of queen f6, though? Trying to defend that pawn. Well, in this case, we are going to play c3. Okay, at this point, I don't really recommend us trying to play knight d2 and knight b3. If black's going to go out of their way with a move like queen f6 to just hang on to one pawn, let's start playing aggressive, right? Let's play c3. Let's capture back with the knight. Knight d5 is on the way. The computer actually recommends for black to go back to d8 in this case. And now after knight d5, white has almost a +1 advantage. Black here is really on their heels in terms of what they're going to do next. I mean, let's just say, for example, black plays a move like knight f6, right? Trying to contest with our knight on d5. Well, in this instance, we're simply going to play bishop g5. And notice, we have 2 minor pieces on that knight. It's pinned, and they only have 2 defenders. So the next move, we can always capture back on f6 if we want to. Let's just say a move like h6 is played. Okay, we can take on f6, play a move like queen f3, keep adding the pressure, and here white again with a 1 game. See, I'll go back to this position. If black does take back with the pawn, I recommend just castling quickly, right? Castle the king, get rook e1 ideas in the air. And once that pawn is on d4, it's up to you. If you want to offer up another one, right, and go ahead in the game down a pawn, but up a ton of development, or you can try to win that pawn back with either knight d2, knight f3, or bishop b5, pinning the knight if d6 is played. What about knight takes d4? Well, in this case, I recommend bishop e3, right? Just continue developing. If black wants to, just play a move like d6 or something, we're just going to snatch off that knight, right? And then after e takes d4, take back with the queen. We're going to have a nice space advantage, and we're going to be even in material. If black plays this move of knight c6, there's a ton of possibilities that we have here. I personally am a big fan of queen g4, though, right? Attacking this pawn on g7. By the way, if we see a move like g6, we're going to go back to f3. And a lot of you are probably wondering, and for good reason, why did we just go g4 and then f3? Why didn't we just play f3 right away? Well, we played g4 because we actually think that this position is better for white than this position for white, with a pawn back on g7. By playing g6, black has just weakened their dark squares quite a bit, and that's going to be good for us going forward. And here, if a move like queen f6, we're going to, again, bring the queen back to e2, right? I don't recommend this often. In fact, one of my general tips in the opening is to not move a piece twice. We just moved this queen 1, 2, and 3 times, but we did it for a purpose. We did it so that this pawn would be on g6, and the queen would be on f6. Here, black is very loose and prone to attack. The dark squares are weak, and we also have knight c3 and knight d5 ideas in the air. And notice, whenever we do play knight c3, their dark squared bishop is already gone, right? So bishop b4 ideas are not in the air. And on top of that, g7 is a big, big weakness at the moment, as well as squares like h6, g5, I mean, you name it. And white here simply has the edge from a strategic standpoint. Going back to queen g4, what happens if black doesn't want to play g6, but they instead go with the move of queen f6? Well, in this case, we're just going to continue developing with knight c3. What happens here, though, if black plays the move of d6? This is actually the computer recommendation. Black here just attacking our queen. Well, in that case, we'll just drop it back. If a move like bishop e6, we have knight d5 ready to go, attacking the queen. If you want to play something like queen d8, we'll castle queenside and connect our rooks. If you take the knight, we're going to take back with the e-pawn and really try to ruffle things up on the queen side with 2 bishops and a queen aimed directly at it. And on top of that, we're going to be up in development. What happens if a move like d5 is played? In fact, every one time d6 is played, d5 is played 3. And I think the reason for that is that this at first sight just seems to be crushing for black, right? Black here is attacking the queen, and they're attacking the bishop. But it actually turns out that white is winning this because of the one move, the one single move that gives us the edge. Anything else is simply losing. The one move we have is queen g3. Very quiet, right? Very quiet option, just dropping the queen back. But now the idea is that if black doesn't take the bishop, I mean, we have 1, 2, 3 pieces all aimed directly at it, right? So we're going to snatch off that pawn on g5. We're going to be even in material and attacking the queen on f6 and more, right? So here, black really does need to think about taking out the bishop. And in this case, they are up +4, and it may seem like they're winning, but we now have knight d5, and now we see the purpose of queen g3. we're attacking g7. And the reason that this is important is because this knight is attacking both the queen and the pawn on c7, right? If we drop the queen back to e2, for example, black could just play something like queen d6 or queen d8 and simply hold on to everything. But in this situation, the queen cannot run away and both hold on to g7 and c7, right? Black has to choose one. In fact, the best thing they can do is hold on to g7 so that we don't take and simply win the rook on h8. But if they go this way, okay, we're still going to win the other rook on a8. And here white's up material with a black king that is very prone to future checks and attack. So yeah, we just covered this move of bishop c5, right? Black here kind of just mirroring what we did. If we do see that, play this move d4, right? If you see bishop takes, play knight f3, you're going to gain a great edge development. And if they take back with the pawn, in that situation, you have bishop takes f7 check, followed by queen h5, picking off that dark squared bishop. What about this move of knight f6? Okay, we're going to dedicate a little bit of time to this knight f6 move, as well as knight c6 at the very end. Well, in this case, white has a ton of different possibilities. In fact, a lot of these I'm going to make videos on in the future. One of them is this move of knight c3, right, with the Stanley variation, kind of transposing a little bit into the Vienna game. By the way, black does have this option now of going into the Frankenstein-Dracula variation with knight takes e4. And just as a short intro, things get crazy. The main move here for white is queen h5, and the best move for black is knight d6. Now white has the choice if they want to play a move like bishop b3 and kind of just keep the tension and the pressure here, or if they want to take on e5 with check against the king. Needless to say, this variation is absolutely crazy. Going back, knight c3 is an option. Another move we have here is d4 with the Ursov gambit, putting some pressure on e5. That is another opening option that I'm going to make an entire video on. Going back, we also have this move of f4 with the Greco gambit. I don't think I've got any requests for this at this point, so let me know if you guys would want to see a video on this f4 option. Needless to say, going back, I mean, there's a ton of different things that we can do in a situation like this, including the move of d3, right? d3 is totally playable. It's not a blunder by any means. However, I wanted to give a quick shout out to my Stafford Gambit players out there, okay? And if you have followed a player such as, well, you know who I'm about to say, Eric Rosen, you may think of this move of knight f3. And really what we're trying to get here is kind of a reverse Stafford Gambit in a lot of ways. By the way, black can play this move d5, in which case we're simply going to capture back. But what happens if black takes on e4? Well, in this case, I actually don't recommend capturing back on e5. I think that if we take on e5, black's going to get d5, gaining a tempo against our bishop, and I'm not the biggest fan of that. I think the more fun option is knight c3. Right? And again, black can go back, and there's things that we got to figure out against that. I mean, if knight f6, we're probably just going to capture off that pawn. But if knight takes c3 is played, we're going to take back with the d pawn. And here we really do have a Stafford Gambit, but we're up a tempo. Okay, if you don't know what the Stafford Gambit is, you can look it up on my channel, and I do have a few videos dedicated to it. In this instance, though, just speaking of this position alone, I mean, here white has a huge edge in development, right? Black has 0 pieces out. White has 2. And even our pieces that are out are also pretty active, and they're doing quite a bit in this position, right? We're currently eyeing moves like knight takes e5. The bishop is aimed directly at f7. And notice here, if black tries to defend this pawn on e5 with a move like d6, we're now going to play knight g5. And white is simply winning this, right? There's no way for black to stop us from capturing on f7. There's no way for black to defend that pawn. If a move like bishop e6, this may seem like a good option, but now we just take back with the bishop, and we're not going to take on e6. Instead, we're going to play this move of queen f3, right? Threatening b7 and threatening a mate in 1. White is simply crushing. Going back, what other options does black have? Well, another move is knight c6, but again, sure, you are defending your pawn, but we're going to play knight g5. And okay, I mean, this is just simply lost for black. So, okay, going back, what is the best move? Well, it's shockingly f6. f6 is the best move that black has here. If you guys have ever watched Ben Feingold, you probably know that you should never play f6 as black. This is one of the rare, very rare exceptions, right? f6 is the computer move, and the reason for that is that it defends e5 and it prevents knight g5. A lot of players online seem to like knight h4, looking to threaten queen h5, but this can be pretty easily stopped by g6, and we can keep making quick little threats, but black can keep defending them. My personal approach is just to kind of view this position as one in which case we have a big edge in development and just castle kingside. Okay, leave it up to black to not react to threats, but instead just build up the tension and build up our attacking prowess. For example, in this case here, black's most popular move is c6, and this seems to make a lot of sense, right? Here, black trying to prepare d5 and just get our bishop the heck out of the way. I mean, black is not having fun right now. They want to castle, they want to get their king to safety, but they just can't do it at the moment. But even with one move like c6, they're simply lost. After knight takes e5, this is crushing for white. Whole idea being that we're actually threatening queen h5 with check, right? Going up against the king. If black tries to stop this with a move like g6, we can play knight f7, attacking both the queen and the rook. If you see a move like f takes e5, trying to take away the power of queen h5, well, we're still going to play it anyways. Whole idea being, if king e7, we have a mate in one. And if g6, thank you for a pawn and for your rook. See how going back, if you do see this move of knight f6, we really truly do have a ton of different options. It's really up to you on which one you like to play the most. What about this move of knight c6? Well, this is really the one move in comparison to knight f6 and bishop c5. It's going to be hard for us to play any kind of crazy attacking chess. There's not a lot of traps here. And really what black is doing is they're not trying to attack a pawn, but they're simply just developing a piece and strengthening their dark square, specifically the pawn on e5. In this scenario, we can transpose into other openings, right? We can play knight f3, which gets us transposed into an Italian game. We can play knight c3, which gets us into the Vienna max lane defense. We can also play a move like d3 here, right? d3 is totally playable, not a blunder at all. We could try this move of d4 as well, but I personally don't really recommend it. I mean, if e takes d4, we do get into a Scotch gambit, which is great. But the problem with d4 is that if knight takes, I just don't see how white is going to get compensation for the pawn, right? We can get a little bit of compensation, but not enough to make up for it. I mean, what's the worst that we're going to do, right? If we play knight f3, black just trades off, and they're simply up a pawn. If we play c3, the black knight could go back to c6, or just play knight e6, and we're all sitting here wondering why we gave up a pawn, right? We didn't get more development because of it, more immediate development. So, okay, going back, if you do see knight c6, I don't recommend d4 in that instance. I also think that f4 can be a little bit risky because this knight is not on f6 and the queen is aiming directly at h4. I would recommend either knight f3, going into the Italian game, a ton of possibilities there that you can work through, or the Vienna game with knight c3. And if you don't like either of those, d3 is also a playable option. Hey, I wanted to finish this video out by giving a big shout out to my Patreon supporters for the month of January in 2023. Love you guys and appreciate the support a ton. If you haven't checked out the Patreon before, there's a lot of exclusive benefits that you gain by becoming a member, and I hope to see you over there.